Welcome back to the Mother Gaia Birthy Pod. I'm your host Katy, and today we're diving into a really powerful topic, processing birth trauma. If you're a mum who's had a tough birth experience, or you know someone who has, this episode is for you. This week I'm speaking with Amber Sperling, all the way from Canada, who introduces me to EMDR, a technique for working through trauma that I hadn't come across before recording this episode. Amber shares how EMDR can help reprocess and release painful memories from birth experiences, and honestly it sounds like something I really want to try. So if you're curious about new ways to heal from difficult moments in birth, let's get into it with Amber and discover how EMDR might offer a path to a gentler, more grounded sense of peace.
My name is Amber Sperling. I am a registered social worker in Ontario, Canada. I live in Barrie and operate a group private practice. We focus mainly on helping moms. The bulk of the clients that I see, because I'm very passionate about them, are either trying to get pregnant, are pregnant, recently had a baby, or have had kids for a while and realizing that they haven't felt like themselves since then. So I do a lot of work with trauma, birth trauma. I see people across Ontario virtually or in my office if they live close enough to come see me here. So that's my main business. I have a few side things that I'm involved with as a volunteer. I volunteer with our local hospital. We're trying to fundraise to expand our NICU. I founded a perinatal practitioner network of other practitioners that work with people through the perinatal period, which I had a meeting this morning, so I'm fresh off that. So yeah, I love working with clients, but I recognize that it's not just about what we do one-to-one. It's like there's the bigger stuff out there of how we change the systems.
Yeah. Oh, brilliant. Yeah. Well, I'm all for changing the system. So obviously I'm based in the UK, and we have the NHS, and I could go on for hours and days about how the system itself is absolutely rubbish and isn't set up for women, let alone birthing women, etc., etc. What's it like where you are?
Well, far from perfect, I'll say far from perfect. I mean, we do get a year paid mat leave by the government, up to 55% of our wages, I believe. But I mean, there's gaps. So I find I oscillate between, like, yes, I'm very grateful for things like we have a healthcare system that we pay through taxes. So you don't pay when you go to the hospital. So it's quite different from the US in that respect. However, we're not always able to access what we need when we need it. And since I see a lot of clients who have experienced birth trauma and, are really struggling with how they were treated while birthing, I definitely see a lot of where things could be improved. And also just supporting women and mothers in general. Like there's the mental load is huge. Like it's not that long ago where there was a lot of 2-parent households with one income and people were managing, where now, and don't get me wrong, I'm a business owner. I love working. I don't want to be a stay-at-home mom. I respect stay-at-home moms. However, our systems haven't changed so much. So now we have 2 parents working in most households. However, there's still all the things that need to be done to best support our families. So the system has not caught up.
No, it really hasn't. So it was only maybe a few days ago that I was speaking to somebody else about trauma-informed birth support. And obviously going into that kind of situation where you, as both support and as the mother, the pregnant person, the person giving birth, having information that's going to prevent or at least reduce the risk or the effects of trauma and things like that. Do you work a lot with prevention, or do you tend to work more with parents after the fact and then giving them like debriefs or counselling, or what is it that you kind of do primarily that way?
That's a good question. So the bulk is probably like the reprocessing. I am an EMDR certified therapist. So I use eye movement desensitization reprocessing, and it's incredibly effective. Myself and one of my associates, we did additional training. So usually 2 to 3 sessions, we could help someone like process that birth. It's like magic. I love it, having that ability. However, I have been, I would say even more lately, shifting to that, like seeing the clients who are pregnant, having conversations around like, what does it mean to have a birth plan? Because when we're rigid in our expectations, that's often where we have like that emotion dysregulation, because we're expecting something. And that can apply to like anything in life. And also assertiveness. So talking about communication, how do we communicate with the people around us, asking questions, having informed choices, being able to say, I'm not sure that fits for what I need, not feeling pushed into a C-section. Yes, of course, I had an emergency C-section. I get it. They're needed, and also not always. So being able to communicate, advocate for yourself, or having someone with you to help with that. I'm also doing more work with like in the pregnancy period around like leaning into your values. What is important to you and your family, so you can then advocate? Because often it's like, yes, of course I'm going to speak up for myself, but I also don't really know what I want. I find that often too, like there's so much information out there. So when you're overwhelmed, it's hard to make decisions and then also to advocate. Because if we are so rigid that we can't handle things being out of our control, or things being, I'm trying to think of other examples, but like if we're so rigid, it has a lot to do with our rigidity in our thinking that like, I can't handle that. That's not what I want. Then if you're thrown a curveball, then that's where the distress comes in quite often, right? Like, yes, of course, there's birth trauma that comes around with like medical error, which I hope does not happen to anyone, or things that come up with like just the way baby is growing. And also there's like that rigidity of like, I can't handle this. Well, that your whole body's going to tense, your whole like ability to process what's happening changes. Yeah,
absolutely. So getting back to EMDR, I've had 3 people up until now say that they've used it and thought it was amazing. I've never heard of it before. What is it?
Good question. So eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. That's what EMDR stands for. I'm going to say we, because I think most people use the acronym, 1, because it's way shorter and easier, 2, because it's evolved. So 30 plus years of evidence and practice. What it is using bilateral stimulation. So it's across the body. So usually like eye movement, we're moving our eyes back and forth where they're crossing the midline. But we also use tapping. The majority of my clients, I use tapping with them. So we use bilateral tapping, which activates the limbic system in your brain. So when we have a traumatic event, and I'm not a neuroscientist, but I find it fascinating. So when we experience a traumatic event, if we look at our like hand model of the brain, we flip our lid, right? Like there's a part of us that says, I can't handle this, I'm checking out. So memory is stored different. The memory is stored more as like emotional memory and body memory. It's not rational, right? Because that part of our brain has checked out. So what EMDR does is we kind of manually allow that part of our brain to go away so we can access those memories that have been stored maladaptively. What it does is it uses something called the AIP model, so the Adaptive Information Processing Model, which is being able to say, today, my brain today can look back on that event and reprocess what happened from today's lens. So for example, I had a mom the other day who came to me and she said, I just realized that while I was on the table for the C-section, I thought I was going to die. And I was like, stop right there. Like, that is trauma. Your brain told you, I'm going to die. Your brain was giving up. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take your brain today back to that memory. And so you can tell yourself, yes, that's scary. You thought you were going to die and you didn't.
Yeah.
Because that part of your brain that thought you were going to die is still stuck in that loop. I'm going to die. So EMDR uses bilateral stimulation to bring that part of you that's stuck to the present, to be able to recognize it's actually going to be okay.
Yeah.
And that's like very general. There are situations where we adapt it differently. But for this client, for example, in birth trauma, being able to like go back and be like, yeah, that was like totally scary. And, you know, we'll say horrific in the moment, but you are actually okay right now.
Yeah. It's having suffered from things like PTSD in my lifetime. It's, from what you're describing, it sounds like it's the like the pause button. So for me, and I know this is like generalized, and obviously I'm only going from my own experiences, but I do know that this is something that a lot of people who have PTSD have done. You check out, but you relive that moment over and over and over again, and there's nothing that you can do about it. And you're not just sort of thinking about it in your head. It's not the same as like, oh, that conversation I had with such and such the other day, what did I say? You're fully reliving it. You can see it in your head, you can feel it in your bones. You are literally going over the same thing on replay constantly. It's like having a DVD on repeat.
Yep.
So from the sounds of it, what you're doing is you're getting the remote control and go, well, just pause that there 1 minute. There's more to this DVD, there's more to this story, and you're further along in this DVD than you're stuck on.
Yeah,
so
love that.
Yeah, we've skipped to the end and there's a happy ending. Right, now go back and go through it again.
Yes. And I used to use, like, prior to becoming an EMDR therapist, I used to use CBT, like trauma focused CBT with clients, and that's almost exactly the process of what we would do, right? Like, when did you know you were okay? Okay, tell me about that. And then we'd go back and then come forward, back and forth. And then when I did my EMDR training, it was like being able to do that whole process in a much shorter period of time. Yeah. So that, like, what you just described is a really good explanation.
I mean, I think for me, from your explanation as well, the way that you've described it, especially with the movement of the eyes, the doing the tapping and things like that, because it is a full body experience when you're going through PTSD. CBT works on some people, but not on everybody. CBT for me was an act of futility. I just felt like I was living the same thing out loud over and over again. It made no difference. Whereas when you're engaging everything that's involved, like you say, with that moving your eyes, doing the tapping, things like that, that feels for me way better, which is probably why it works so well.
Well, yeah, because for a lot of people that do CBT, when you flip your lid, like the front of your brain, this is where our executive functioning is. Our executive functioning is offline when we're experiencing trauma. So you can't reason your way. You can't be like, oh, but I'm okay, because the part of your brain that doesn't feel okay isn't online. Like it's not connecting, right? So I think by adding the body piece in, it makes a huge difference for so many people. And as you were talking there, I had a thought and I was like, oh, that makes total sense. Because when I talk to people, I'll say to them, when you bring up that moment, that worst moment, are you looking through your eyes or are you looking at the memory? And trauma is when you're still looking through your eyes at the memory, even though the memory is completely over, like that time period is completely done. And so EMDR allows you to push that memory further away. So you go from looking at the memory through your eyes to like watching it on a screen.
Yeah. That sounds amazing. That's exactly probably what I could have done with about 20 years ago, but you know.
It is amazing. And I do tell people, like, I feel like a wizard, but also like it's a gift. It is such an honor to be able to have this skill. And then also, like, with the way that my practice works, being able to use it with birth trauma, because what we know is when a baby's born, our learning curve is ridiculous, right? And we know that, like, birthing people are exhausted, right? Like you're exhausted. And when you're exhausted, it's really hard to learn new things. It's really hard to process information. And so then I see women, or I was seeing them, like 6 months out, 9 months out, 2 years out, because that's when they felt like they had the energy and the clarity to work through these things. So now I'm like, I have midwives referring these new moms to me at 2 weeks out, because there's a huge period of time where they're not feeling able to be present with their babies, or they're feeling guilty for not feeling present with their babies. And it's impacting that bond. It's impacting their, like, enjoyment of motherhood. So the sooner we can process that birth trauma, the better for mom and the better for baby.
Absolutely. And I mean, that goes again hand in hand with that, like how our society works now. And I mean, I keep saying this with everybody that I've had on, but like, we've lost that village. That after that first couple of weeks where you might be lucky enough to have, say, dad or partner or someone home with you, but that's only for a couple of weeks if you're lucky enough to have that. And then all of a sudden, you're then completely on your own with this tiny little human that you've got to feed and clean and look after and all the rest of it. And there's no one else around. Then add on birth trauma or PTSD or something else on top of that. Your brain's not working properly anywhere, let alone with anything else on top of it. So to have something that kind of bridges that gap, and it might not be, I don't know whether this is right or not, you correct me if I'm wrong, but in that first few days, weeks, or months, when you say your brain's not working properly, you haven't had enough sleep, you're just literally a milking farm and all that kind of stuff, to have something in between to just go, right, look, we will work on this fully when you have your brain in the right place. Right now, we're just going to do these little techniques that's going to get you through. I'm in the ballpark with that.
You're in the ballpark, because that's how CBT would work. I would argue that that's how CBT would work. With EMDR, when we do it within 90 days of a trauma, using like it's called recent event protocol, within 90 days before our memory like transfers into like long-term memory, you can actually reduce distress around the event very quickly, like within a few hours of treatment. So for some people that might be 2 or 3 sessions. For some people that might be one long session. So, and their brain doesn't have to be back online. You can do that within the first 90 days of the baby being born in that situation. So yeah, whereas for CBT, if you're exhausted and you're not thinking clear, or even like behavior activation, which is super helpful, but if you're not sleeping and someone's like, go, what's something you enjoy doing? Can you fit in a walk? And you're like, I'm exhausted, I can't get out of the house. Or like, you want me to get dressed? Like, so sometimes there's barriers there that are real barriers. Versus like, I meet moms like this virtually. They don't have to leave the house. I don't care if they're breastfeeding while we're talking, or babies crawling on them. So it is
amazing.
Really,
I like the modern day wizard. You got the magic wand. Here we go.
Equal power, that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, what struck me, especially with that, I didn't realize you could do something so quickly. A so quickly after the event, and B so quickly have such a rapid change. From having various therapies and various things and blah, blah, blah. It's, for me personally, it's taken months and months and months after various different things. And obviously with EMDR, you've only just explained it to me. It sounds absolutely amazing. I've never heard of it up until today. I think that was like really singing it from the rooftops. I think everybody needs to know about it. Honestly, if it can work that quickly in such a short space of time afterwards, it sounds like one of those little miracle things, almost too good to be true. But obviously, you wouldn't be sat there telling me about it, saying, "Look, I've got all these clients."
Yes.
If it didn't work.
I can say, so the recent event protocol, like, I don't like to get all like jargony, but like the training I received was from people that developed this specific use of EMDR in the Ukraine during the war. And so they were going in and helping people to de-stress from what they were experiencing and seeing results. And so it's been adopted. And then, my population is perinatal, so that's how I use it, but not everybody does. They might use it for fires or other traumatic events. But there's it's been developed from like war. And I tell people that it's not that we're not changing the memory, we're not taking away the memory. What we're doing is allowing you to think about the memory without that emotional like wave of feeling like you're out of control. So for a lot of women as well, when you talk about birth, there's grieving, right? Grieving because it wasn't the birth you expected. Well, you can't do that if every time you think about the birth, you're like falling apart or blacking out or, having that, PTSD response. So it can be helpful.
That you've absolutely blown my mind. So if I mean, I don't want to sort of belittle it into like a little tip or a trick or something like that. But if somebody is suffering and they've had birth trauma and they just need something in the meantime, for say they're waiting for an appointment with you or something like that, is there something that they can do to kind of pull them out of that state, bring them to the here and now? Is there something little that they can just do right now that you can help with?
Yeah, that was a great, even how you said that, like bringing yourself to the here and now. So I'm sure you've heard of like sensory grounding. So being able to use your senses to be in the present. So whether that's smelling something, a lot of people don't realize that our sense of smell bypasses the part of our brain that has to think about things. So if there is a smell that helps you to feel grounded, calm, carry it in a hand cream or like have an essential oil. Look around, name things that you can see, focus in on colors and shapes. And our brains can't think of two things at once. So if we're feeling overwhelmed, by taking in the sensory information, that's going to help us be more present. So like, what do your socks feel like on your feet? Can you feel your hair resting on your shoulder? Can you smell or taste something? That's the other thing. With trauma, I'm sure you've heard this before, but temperature can be really helpful for grounding. Mm-hmm. So can you carry like ice water with you or a warm tea? Coffee can be wary of caffeine, but something that you enjoy that tastes good. If you love coffee and you're having one coffee a day, for the majority of people, that's okay. But if you're carrying a coffee, I have water in here, so it doesn't smell like anything, but smelling the coffee can be grounding. Take a sip of the warm coffee, again, grounding. I would say if you're feeling overwhelmed, like having flashbacks, it's important for distraction. So what reminds me that I'm here? So maybe the flashback is related to something pre-baby. Maybe you can look at your baby or look at a picture of your baby. I'm thinking of chronological groundings helpful too. So like, what are things that have happened since then?
Yeah.
That show you that you're still here, that you're okay.
Yeah.
Getting outside, being in nature is amazing to be grounded. I know when my second daughter was born, she would be dysregulated, crying, and I'd start to feel overwhelmed, and I'm like, oh yeah, she responds to nature. So I would just take her and stand outside, as long as it wasn't absolutely freezing out. But yeah, even that shift in being outside can be really helpful. Yeah.
Brilliant. Excellent. Is there anything else that we've touched on that you wanted to expand on, or anything that I haven't touched on that you wanted to say about?
One thing that I would say that just adds to what I was just saying, when our bodies are feeling dysregulated, like when we're feeling stress in our bodies, trying to talk ourselves through it doesn't always work. So if you're like, I try to tell myself, like I have affirmations and, I try to think of things in a better light and I still feel dysregulated, it's because your body is feeling it. So think of it as, how is your body feeling? What does your body need before trying to think your way through it?
Yeah.
Also, I'm a big fan of negative emotions being part of our lives. So when bad things happen, it's okay to feel bad.
Yes.
Don't try to feel good about bad things. So your goal in life is not to be happy. You want to experience more joy. So instead of, I use a boombox theory. So, old school boombox where the volume and the bass slide up and down, right? So like anger is way up here, rage is up here. We just slide it down to irritation, annoyance, frustration. Notice when your emotions are up here and like, how do we slide them down? Not how do we get rid of them?
Yeah.
So instead of like, this should not be happening to me, I would prefer, like, it would be nice if this wasn't happening, but I can't change it.
Yeah.
So what can I do to be less distressed, less bothered? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, with anything, there's always good and bad. And we'd be very, very bored if we had nothing bad happen to us, because if everything was good all the time, you'd just think, well, everything, do you know what I mean? Like there's no sort of plateau in it. You've got to be able to understand what the bad things are to be able to feel the joy in the good stuff. Otherwise, you're just merrily toddling along in life and nothing ever happens.
Yeah, or it's very toxic, right? Like,
Yeah.
oh, that
I've got
wasn't
to
so
find a
bad.
Nemo for it.
Yeah, like it's okay to be annoyed with, if someone did something that you didn't like. That's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're allowed the feelings that you've got. You just can't stay in them.
Yeah, feel them, and then, what do you need? Listen to your body, listen to your mind. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, I know this has been slightly shorter than what we were expecting it to be, but I think it's been really helpful and like a lot of information with a lot of really good stuff in it. So if anybody needs to find you, if they want to come and get some EMDR, or they need to chat with you or anything like that, where can they find you?
They can find me on my website. So it's my name, ambersperling.ca. And that's SPERLING. On Instagram, same thing, my name, can direct you to me. I think those are the best the best routes if you live in Ontario, Canada. Myself and my team, most of my team also trained in EMDR. Even 2 of my interns, as of this week, are trained, which is really cool. I'm really excited about that. So we do offer reduced rate and pro bono therapy through the intern clinic. So yeah, anyone in Ontario, Canada can access us for that due to our licensing restrictions, of course.
Oh, that's absolutely amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, so thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Mother Gaia Birthy Pod. I hope you found Amber's insights into EMDR as inspiring and healing as I did. Processing birth trauma can be such an important step, and it's amazing to know that there are resources like EMDR out there for us. If you'd like to support the podcast, feel free to visit my Buy Me a Coffee page. You'll find the link in the episode description. Your support truly helps keep these important conversations going, and don't forget to follow along on social media. You can find me on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok and Threads, where I share updates, tips and more about each episode. Next week we have another incredible episode lined up with Samantha Burgess, who shares her beautiful birth story. You don't want to miss it. Until then, keep tuning in, keep sharing and keep nurturing yourselves and each other.